Hi, this is Gary Auden. I'm bringing you an Educast. Diversity equals network survival. And with me today on this Educast is United Fiber and Data. I'll be speaking today, but I'll be really introducing Chris Lodge, President and COO of United Fiber and Data, and he'll be answering a lot of the questions I have about what this whole diversity issue is about. But let's talk about what we're going to talk about. You have goals when you want your network to survive. There are differences between redundancy and diversity, and you have to look at it in two ways: the urban diversity question and the regional diversity question. Also, when you're looking at setting up a network, do you want to use dark or light fiber? What are the choices we have there? Let's take a look at some network failures and their impact, and then especially the economics of diversity. So Chris, let's start with the first screen. Would you list these items for us in what you think is the most important order?
It's a good one. It's and everybody's opinion on that definitely varies. I would definitely say continued operation / no loss of service would definitely be your highest priority. Ensuring security, maintaining QoS, and then shared load and rapid service restoration trailing in behind.
Now this leads to the question of redundancy, and lots of people talk about redundancy. I found a definition here at Techopedia. What do you think your definition is relative to this?
It varies by person, but redundancy is the ability to be redundant, whether it be at the service level or what I call the equipment level, a card, a path. There's a lot of different analogies you could use in there for redundancy, but the definition is definitely it's pretty dead on.
Now, when we talk about redundancy, we're talking about a spare or an extra item, whatever it is, or an extra circuit. But what's the diversity issue here? Because that seems to be important today more than just simply having redundancy.
Exactly. What I tell people is when you look at redundancy, and which a lot of people have some form or fashion, so let's call it an extra network card that you have sitting, whether it be at your data center or your corporate location. Diversity implies redundancy, if you will, not the other way around. And what I mean by that is when you have a diverse path of your existing paths or diversity in your equipment and your connectivity, you have true redundancy. Again, the diversity implies redundancy, not the other way around. Where the other side is, you may just have you could have redundant fibers, as an example, on a corridor or on a path, but if they all pass together and are on the same pole or in the same conduit or in the same trench, you're not diverse.
Let's focus on the urban issue because that's important as well as the regional issue. What can happen with urban networks?
Urban networks, a lot can happen, and I could tell you some crazy stories sometime. But again, cable cuts, fires. Throughout my career, we've been called out because somebody took was doing target practice on a line, right-of-way issues, and what we've seen in the urban growth or urban sprawl as highways and communities grow and grow and grow. We're asked to, meaning cable providers and facility providers, are asked to move our services. The New Jersey Turnpike's a good example of the old right-of-ways that were on there, and over the years how that turnpike has grown and the number of times things have had to be moved or have been cut by what we call the fiber-seeking backhoe.
Yes, I encountered cable cuts in New York City, and our biggest problem was when it was dense underground, a lot of the installers got cables mixed up.
Correct. We see that a lot, especially in the I call it the yesterday times. In things were put in and documentation wasn't kept the same, and even though we're talking digital age, but in some regards a little antiquated when. Even 10 years ago when people were putting fiber on a pole or in the ground, the record keeping was a lot of paper as opposed to electronic systems where it could be easily. So there would be confusions, mix-ups, people going out to turn up another customer but mistakenly cut the wrong fibers to splice into.
Now you have two pictures on the next page for urban disasters. Would you go through those a little bit?
Yeah, so on there is those two are just that. You look at the different color codes. This is for a burial or an underground, and of how we look at things now. And then you look at the picture to the right is one that was cut, and now you're sending out your crew to do a repair, and as you can see, you got to pick that up and either splice in or find the other end to repair that back together, and it gives you a good visual of why sometimes the mean time to repair for some of this older antiquated cable can take so long.
Now let's move into the next question, regional networks, which is a different issue in many ways than what you have in urban. Would you focus on that for us?
Yeah, so regional networks, and as we have listed here, again, the density issue, multiple providers, cuts, fires. People don't realize, but even underground, in manhole systems, there's explosions. And I'm not talking the ones we're seeing on the TV today about terrorist attacks and things like that. That's a whole other magnitude that steps into our communications in the country. But we see small, minor, what we call explosions from natural gas building up inside until something causes it to ignite, which then in return melts the fiber. Lots of construction mistakes. Right-of-ways are getting more and more congested. So you're having more people want to get onto some of those legacy paths. There's only so much room on some of the poles and in some of these right-of-ways.
Now, that focuses on something I think is real important. That's the New York to Washington connection, which is I-95. Lots of people want to go along that roadway. On the other hand, it also makes it very vulnerable. Is that correct?
Correct. So we call it the I-95 corridor. That corridor consists of I-95, Route 1. A lot of people call it the Amtrak corridor, the rail corridor. It's the B line, if you will, between the financial district and Manhattan, as well as North Jersey, down through New Jersey, across into Pennsylvania, through Wilmington, through Baltimore, ultimately into D.C., and then a lot of it hangs a sharp right-hand turn out of D.C. and heads out to all the data centers that we know out in Ashburn and Sterling and things like that. Again, it is the most direct path, but again, it goes back to we're all on that corridor in terms of providers. So a lot of people will have redundancy on that corridor, but we don't have any diversity on it.
I think that is epitomized by this one fire that happened in the CSX tunnel. How bad an impact was that on the corridor?
Again, that's probably one of the best, publicly known examples of that corridor. And I can actually tell you where I was sitting and what I was doing at the time, and when that happened, and how it impacted it and impeded connectivity and routing issues that it created. And again, and if you think about that, that was 2001. We route 3 times what we did, from back then, if not more. I don't have the exact statistic. But when you look at what, we did then versus now, and the impact it had in '01, it's something that drastic happens again on that corridor, it'll be 3 times as worse.
Would you say that the redundancy failed here as well because it was not diversified?
Correct. Like I say, I mean, you can have that redundant card, that redundant router. A lot of people had redundant providers on that, but when that happened, they were redundant. Some may have said they were diverse because they were, 4 feet away from the other one. But when you have a fire that burns like that, it all melted.
Now let's go to the next slide. Would you address the issues of finding or locating diversity paths?
Yeah. So what we look at, and I encourage people to look at, whether it be with United Fiber and Data or others, is looking at those diverse paths. Something that where you're not, whether it be a natural disaster or something like the Baltimore tunnel, that one can't impede on the other, and it gives you that what I call that true diversity. It gives you a safe cable path, and avoiding the density issues that we have in it. So looking for things without going, again, packets can only move across this at a certain speed. It's getting better and better, but the speed of light is the speed of light. So people don't want to, when they're looking at time-sensitive material, they don't want to go 6 states away, if you will, unless absolutely necessary. So diversity from that regard can be expensive in terms of the soft dollar cost by routing it. So looking at something that's parallel to the corridor without getting, doing an overkill in terms of it is what you want to look at.
But I think we need to come to another question, that is, do I, as let's say an enterprise, choose dark fiber or light fiber for this diversity?
And again, we're seeing a mix of that. So, a lot of it depends on you as a company or what you're looking to accomplish. Some may have one or the other on a primary corridor and look for the opposite, on what we call the diverse path, so they don't have to worry about it. Again, the difference being that, on the lit fiber, you have to install your own gear and maintain it, versus your provider maintaining it for you, and can then just do some type of handoff at a whether it be a 40 gig, 100 gig, or getting into the 200 gig and plus standpoint. So it really comes down to a corporate decision, and at what level of diversity and redundancy you're trying to run at. Some will want to match it hand for hand, so whatever they're running on the on their primary, they want on their diversity. And with today's routing protocol, things like that, even versus when you look at that, what we were talking about 2001, there's a lot more you can do now with load sharing. So instead of running everything on a dense corridor, your network looks at its capacity and shares the load to keep everything at a maintainable level.
Now, I've seen the term data center, and people think of that as a place where applications run, but you're talking about more of a networking data center. What's the importance of that?
Again, a networking data center is where data interconnects with others. We all know that the World Wide Web, and I use air quotes around that, is the makeup of everybody's network intermeshed together. You have it from that standpoint, then you have, and people interchange that with, in the cloud and storing their data on in a data center somewhere, whether it be just straight information, audio, video, streaming, things like that into the data center. One is, interconnection of networks. You'll also, those from the industry will hear the term carrier hotels and things like that. But what you're looking to do, again, with a diversity play, which encompasses your redundancy, is interconnect and attach to multiple centers. That's why you hear people talk about putting their data, both in the enterprise at their local corporate office, maybe if they have a data center there, and then they back it up to the cloud, if you will. That's storing it in data centers for them. And all that is dependent upon location. Distance impedes speeds.
One of the points that I've learned from the enterprise world is they never have enough bandwidth. So there's always the idea of, how do I plan for growth? How do you suggest we plan for growth here?
That's the age-old question on it, because at the rate data is growing, it's astronomical, and 90% of it never gets printed, if you will, and we continue to look at it. So I always encourage people to be looking at their the analytics and the trending for it long before your CEO or somebody's calling down saying why is this an issue, and look at what's out there, what you see of your past trends. In a lot of cases will dictate your future trends. Looking at how the electronics are expanding bandwidth. So again, in a very short time in this industry, we went from, in the 90s and I'll call it the early 2000s, transmitting T1 and T3 type speeds, so 45 megs a second at DS3 speeds to just here in these past several years, we've gone from 1 gig to 10 gig to 40 gig, and 200 and 400 are in the process of being released or already released in some cases.
Now, we've been talking about diversity and redundancy and the value of things. Could you address the issues of what fails now? Because we have to figure out what to put in for diversity against these failures.
Yeah, so the failures, and everybody asks, so where is the failure when you look at diversity and redundancy? 40% of all downtime are equipment, some type of equipment. Now, again, there's lots of things that can fall into that. Unfortunately, 25% of it is related to a service provider. That's where, the backbone connectivity and who you purchase from. 25% is actually human error. That's a big component. And lo and behold, less than 10% are related to system attacks. So not saying security and all those things aren't important, but there's a multi-billion-dollar industry to protect the data, and we need to protect it. But when you look at causes of downtimes and issues, that equates to less than 10% of the cost associated with some of those failures. 25% of it is at the provider level, and 40% at the equipment level.
Now, that gets into my budget as an enterprise, and I like the next slide, economics of diversity. What if I have it? What if I don't have it? What's the cost to me?
Well, the best example I can give there, and not to take too far off path, but I often get asked, I've been doing this, a long time, and you put a solution in front of somebody, and the best story I can give is it was probably 8 years ago, put a solution in, because the potential customer contact said how much, every 10 minutes of being down cost his company in terms of revenue and risk. So when we looked at it, so we put a solution together, and I don't remember exactly what it was in terms of cost, but let's just call it, $1. And the minute showed it to me, well, what can I get for 50 cents? And the reason I tell that story is because I tell people your real cost is not doing anything. So when you look at the average cost per minute of an on-plan outage increase from, a little over $5,000, $5,600 to over $8,800 in 2016. You look at a couple hours of downtime, that can really start costing a corporate or an enterprise. So again, it greatly exceeds any additional costs of a diverse network. So when I get somebody that says, this is what it costs me every 10 minutes I'm down, I always say, well, then why would you, if that's what it costs you 10 minutes, why wouldn't you spend half of that to make sure you don't go down?
So that gets into the question of, we're going to have diversity. How do I make this selection?
So what I is always evaluate and look at your diversity and your redundancy that you put in. Same provider weaknesses, same route weaknesses, meaning different provider on same route, and then different provider, different route. Some of your last mile considerations, and also depending on now you talk to some, especially when you get into the larger enterprise, they're not just looking at redundancy or diversity in a B solution. They're looking at an A, B, and C solution. So having triple redundancy or diversity, if you will. So what we call long route considerations. So if something did catastrophic, we live in a different world today. Catastrophic happened, that impacted, your diversity that's a couple hundred miles apart. Having something that can look at a long route consideration that is more, 500 miles apart or so, could be a consideration.
You're in the business of actually delivering this. What are the major points you say to clients about 21st century diversity and its infrastructure?
We are in that space. So again, all the things that I spoke about in terms of diversity are the things that we hit home: data integrity, being diverse, and having distinctive services that are truly diverse, not just redundant on that corridor, as it shows in the map on the slide.
Now, you also are operating within Manhattan as well and have diversity there.
Correct. We have currently, I'm going to say, approximately 30 miles in lower Manhattan of high count cable that we've strung under the city in a diverse fashion, again, to offer our customers both provider diversity, route diversity in and around Manhattan, as well as carrying traffic out of Manhattan to the other locations.
I think that's important because you need that locally to connect to the diversity remotely.
Absolutely. It's imperative.
So let's talk about United Fiber and Data, because most people don't even know who you are.
So United Fiber and Data is we're a registered CLEC, competitive local exchange carrier, in the northeast part of the United States and mid-Atlantic. We operate in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia today. And we are all about uniqueness and being different. We're not trying to be, like some of the others out there. We do not have or route anything on the, we spoke a lot about the I-95 corridor. So when we look at our solutions, we try and look at it from the standpoint of putting ourselves in other enterprise people's shoes or on their desk and say, what would this solve for me and how can I be different? That's what we're all about today. We are currently building and finishing up our long-haul route, and we're also looking at future projects right now to be diverse and different on other corridors as well.
I know in talking to some of your people recently, you have a different attitude towards the sales pitch, is that don't go all with United Fiber and Data, make United Fiber Data one of your network choices for an enterprise rather than the only one, and keep the ones you already have. Is that the way you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one possibility. I mean, in business, everybody wants to go and get more and more and more. The way I put it to people is we're not coming in to say you spend $1 a month with other people on the corridor. I'm not telling you to move that whole dollar to USD. I'm suggesting that what if we can give you a true diverse solution. You only move 30 cents to USD, and ultimately maybe now even collectively save you a couple dollars. You have true diversity now. Instead of spending $1, you're spending 95 cents with a percentage of that with USD and having that true diversity.
I'd like people to take a look at the information resources here. They're well worth reading, especially the one at the bottom that the FCC put together about diversity, redundancy, and resiliency. If you need to contact UFD, this is the email, the phone, and their website. And thank you very much, Chris, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.